Thanks for tuning back into our Golden Era of Kiss series. Today, we're breaking down the evolution of their iconic makeup and, more importantly, the transformation of their stage gear during the band's peak years. In the pantheon of American rock, few bands have engineered their visual identity as strategically as Kiss, using it as the very bedrock of their commercial and artistic empire. When they crawled out of the NYC underground in '73, their look wasn't just some freak show, it was a meticulously calculated masterpiece of pop art. We'll explore how their early DIY aesthetics laid the flawless foundation for the high-end professional costumes that followed. Then, we'll trace the history of their changing wardrobe, weaving in the contributions and anecdotes of the designers who defined their look. Part 1. The Visual Revolution. A DIY pop art masterpiece. The Kiss saga begins in '73, rising from the ashes of Wicked Lester, as Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley envisioned a band the world had never seen before. Their initial visual identity, the makeup and gear for the Demon, Starchild, Spaceman, and Catman, was entirely self-made, born from raw amateur grit without any professional help. Yet, the execution was so striking that its core structure remained unshaken through decades of professional redesigns. The most defining aspect of early Kiss was their absolute discipline regarding color. They strictly adhered to a monochrome palette, black, white, and silver, with only the slightest accents of red for blood or lips. This austere color scheme was a stroke of genius, making them stand out instantly in a glam rock scene flooded with technicolor. This self-imposed limitation gave the band a mythic, monumental weight. Black represented power and darkness, white, an anonymous canvas, and silver, a futuristic flash of technology. This discipline allowed four distinct personas to function as a unified army. Their makeup during this era essentially transplanted the context of pop art, defined by icons like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein, directly into the raw, visceral physicality of rock music. It's famous history that their early gear was sourced from family help and cheap materials found in NYC sex shops and leather dens. However, surviving records and analyses from that era prove these were far from being mere, shoddy substitutes. Take, for instance, Paul Stanley's belt from their 1973 New Year's Eve show. It featured a complex arrangement of three distinct types of studs, cone studs and two different sizes of pyramid studs. The precision of the alignment and the calculated angles of each stud carried a professional gravity that transcended mere amateur handicraft. Furthermore, the original bat wings handcrafted by Gene Simmons, and the silver geometric patterns conceived by Ace Frehley served as the ultimate blueprints for professional designers to later replicate with far more expensive materials. Even the makeup designs had reached their absolute, definitive state during this primordial stage. Paul Stanley briefly experimented with a symmetrical look known as the Bandit, but he soon pivoted back to the iconic Starchild. While Peter Criss's Catman underwent minor cosmetic tweaks, its core essence had already been fully established by 1973. One can define the history of their makeup as having reached its definitive culmination during this 1973 DIY era. From this point forward, the focal point of Kiss's visual evolution shifted away from the face, the makeup itself, and moved entirely toward the costumes that encompassed their personas. Part 2. Going Pro. The aesthetics of Hotter Than Hell. By 1974, with a Casablanca contract and the shrewd Bill Aucoin as manager, their visuals leveled up into professional theatricality. This was the dawn of professional commercial design for the band. You can't talk about the Hotter Than Hell era without mentioning designer Larry Legaspi. Based in New York's West Village, he established a boutique called Moonstone, where he pioneered a distinct aesthetic, a fusion of sci-fi, comic books, rock opera, and horror. He took the cheap leather gear they'd been buying at S&M shops and transformed it into armor that amplified their personas. His work transcended mere clothing, it was engineered to make the wearer look superhuman. Gene Simmons. A heavy, imposing jacket adorned with predatory tusks. Moving away from the early skull print shirts, he transitioned toward more organic, integrated bat wings. This solidified the Demon as a definitive symbol of both terror and authority. Paul Stanley. A leather jacket emblazoned with a massive rhinestone star across the back. The final iconography of the Starchild had been realized. Ace Frehley. A black-based bodysuit featuring a massive, inverted triangular motif in silver and black across the chest. The design introduced Legaspie's signature technique of using ball chains to bridge the segments of the suit. The quintessential visualization are the spaceman, cosmic and futuristic. Peter Criss, capturing the raw agility and predatory cunning of a wild animal. Part 3, establishing the Golden Era template. The Alive costumes. In 1975, with the release of their legendary live album, Alive, Kiss exploded into a global cultural phenomenon. The costumes from this era served as a definitive distillation of their previous experiments, establishing a standard Kiss imagery that remains the benchmark to this day, a truly pivotal milestone in their history. During this period, it was female designer Maria Contessa who took the reins of their costume production. She effectively translated Larry Legaspie's avant-garde vision into high-performance garments capable of surviving the brutal rigors of a world tour. Between 1974 and 1983, Contessa crafted many of the band's most iconic costumes, solidifying her status as the definitive master tailor of Kiss. The Alive era costumes boasted an unprecedented visual equilibrium, striking a perfect contrast between rich textures and the iconic black and silver color palette. Paul's signature star boots. During this period, Paul Stanley debuted the star boots, which would eventually become his ultimate trademark. The design, knee-high leather boots adorned with stars in silver rhinestones, caught the glare of the spotlights, radiating an electric brilliance across the stage. Gene's flame-retardant suit. During the Alive tour, Gene Simmons' fire-breathing spectacle was amplified to a far more massive scale. Accordingly, his costumes were treated with flame-retardant finishes and a special surface coating designed to repel his blood, a concoction of food coloring and yogurt, preventing it from soaking into the fabric. Ace's lightning bolt motif. A bolder, more definitive lightning bolt motif became solidified as a core element of Ace Frehley's stage attire. This served to further reinforce his Space Ace persona as the ultimate intergalactic guitar hero. The Alive era visuals transcended mere stage costumes, beginning to function as a flawless brand logo for a massive merchandising powerhouse. The silhouettes of the four members during this era reached such a level of symbolic perfection that they required no further modification, seamlessly translating into posters, t-shirts, and eventually, the iconic action figures. This was the result of their instantly recognizable personas, forged in the band's early DIY ethos, being refined to a professional brilliance through expert craftsmanship. Part 4, the pinnacle of theatrical rock, the Destroyer-era armor. In 1976, with the release of the Destroyer album, Kiss transformed from a mere rock band into larger-than-life superheroes. The costumes of this era represented the pinnacle of theatrical expression, the most sophisticated and intricately constructed ensembles in the history of rock. Larry Legaspie was once again the visionary behind the designs, spearheading the look for this legendary era. On Destroyer, he dedicated himself to fully leveraging the band's potential as comic book heroes, bringing that larger-than-life persona to the forefront. Legaspie was a pioneer in technical innovation, being among the first to integrate cutting-edge materials like Thinsulate, originally developed for industrial and cold weather use, into high-performance stage attire. The defining piece of the Destroyer-era costumes is undoubtedly Gene Simmons' legendary dragon boots. These were far more than mere footwear, they were closer to sculptural masterpieces, featuring exquisitely molded dragon heads. Compression molded from original master molds, these boots featured intricate recreations of dragon scales and eyes, the latter inlaid with red and clear rhinestones. The costumes for all four members were outfitted with heavy shoulder armor, repurposed and modified from actual American football pads. This effectively enlarged their physical presence, making them appear far larger than life and granting them an imposing, formidable stature. A masterfully balanced juxtaposition of leather, spandex, plastic, and rhinestones was engineered to meticulously control the reflection of light and the absorption of shadow. However, this visual opulence came at a heavy price. Gene Simmons' entire ensemble weighed approximately 30 pounds, with the dragon boots alone weighing nearly 9 pounds per foot. According to wardrobe assistant Hannah Kincaid, the costumes resembled a crime scene after every show. Drenched in sweat and stage blood, It required a grueling nightly routine, hosing them down in the shower and painstakingly reapplying each rhinestone one by one. The Destroyer-era costumes marked the exact moment Kiss stopped being human and chose to become icons. They were no longer mere mortals, they became supernatural entities, scored into the public psyche like something ripped from a movie screen or a comic book. Part 5. The Aesthetics of Intricate Studwork, the Love Gun era and its Detailed Evolution. The 1977 Love Gun costumes leaned into the superhero vibe but with an added fetishistic intensity, obsessed with material textures and intricate stud work. The designs of this era were once again spearheaded by Maria Contessa, marking a pinnacle of obsessive attention to detail that firmly defined each member's unique persona. But with these very costumes, the black, white, and silver iron rule that defined Kiss began to erode from within. By 1979's Dynasty, they weren't just adding loud colors, the designs became gaudy, veering into the realm of bad taste. This was the moment Kiss ceased to be Kiss. Conclusion: nostalgia for a lost discipline. The Kiss saga began with flawless DIY pop art in '73, only to self-destruct in an '80s flood of color and kitsch, ending tragically with the removal of the makeup. The remarkably sophisticated foundation they had built in their early DIY days was, ironically, diluted of its raw purity with every layer of professional over-embellishment. The power and mystery of their monochrome world couldn't survive the reality of primary colors, sequins, and the honest, unmasked face. In the '80s, they looked like gods exiled from Olympus, wandering the earth in cheap threads, a truly pathetic sight. It would take another 13 years and the miracle of the 1996 reunion for Kiss to finally return to their roots, black, white, and silver, and reclaim their lost mythology.